You got something weird going on here. Like you were supposed to type something, but you never do.
I will when we get done. Hot mic. 94.3 The Ox, Diamond Rio, and oh my sweet baby. On your Monday ride, 8:28 now, time for Coffee Talk, brought to you by the Comanche Chamber of Commerce and Agriculture. Check them out at #Explore Comanche, Texas. We welcome in and say good morning to Cynthia Newton with Hope Counseling. How we doing?
Good morning. I'm doing well. It's Monday.
It's been quite the weekend for you.
It has, you know. I mean, I survived the first freeze okay, but the second one apparently decided to give me a busted pipe.
Oh, no. Nothing says have a good weekend like a busted pipe.
Plumbing issues, yeah. You know, that's great. At least I have my plumber on speed dial, and
yeah, that comes in right handy.
It does come in handy.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's me. I need help.
It's me again, Margaret. Got my scuba fins on. The water's getting deeper.
I'm like, help me. Oh, so anyway, but yes. I'm back. I've survived. I've got a patch fix, and now we get back to work, right?
That's right. Oh, man.
And you
fan down.
Start breaking stuff.
I can do that.
Man, I can't ever trust you, Kyle.
What's on the front burner today?
We are talking about war-related trauma in light of what's going on in Russia and Ukraine right now.
Right.
So, you know, as most of y'all know, there's a war in Ukraine right now. That the president of Russia aims to take back Ukraine, they were once part of the Soviet Union. If you don't know the background, they were once part of the Soviet Union, but gained their independence in 1991, and as the result, Ukrainians are now fighting a war to hold on to their independence from Russia. So how does this affect the Ukrainians? Ukrainians are now forced to flee their home country, leaving everything they know behind, or take up arms and fight against Russian forces. Yeah. As we know, wars can have lasting impacts on not only military personnel, but also civilians. During war, civilians and military personnel deal firsthand with traumatic events such as bombings, being bombarded with shells, grenades, watching tanks drive through their residential areas, the constant panic of survival, and witnessing gruesome deaths all around. These events have lasting impacts on not only military personnel, but also innocent civilians and their families for generations to come. So some of these lasting impacts, individuals who go through these traumatic events are likely to deal with nightmares, irritability, increased startle responsiveness, a tendency of angry outburst, general impairment of functioning. They're typically used to describe PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. Most people have heard of that, may not know all of about it, but PTSD can develop after exposure to a potentially traumatic event that is beyond a typical stressor. Okay, so it has to be beyond a typical stressor. Events that may lead to that include, but are not limited to, obviously war, violent personal assaults, natural or human-caused disasters, accidents, other forms of violence, combat. Exposure to events like these are common. About 1/2 of all United States adults will experience at least one traumatic event in their life, but most do not develop PTSD. People who experience PTSD may have persistent, frightening thoughts and memories of the events, experience sleep problems, feel detached or numb, or may be easily startled in severe forms. PTSD can significantly impair a person's ability to function at work, at home, and socially. So, you know, talking about Ukraine and what's going on there, I want us to take a step and look at American veterans now, you know, and how PTSD affects them, and how what's going on in Ukraine might even be affecting them right now. Yeah. So PTSD is not only impacting those in Ukraine, but also has impacted U.S. veterans. If you go back to OIF and OEF, or Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom, 11 to 20% of the veterans that served during that time have PTSD. The Gulf War, Desert Storm, about 12% of the Gulf War veterans have PTSD. This is in a year tallies from the VA. As a result of the Vietnam War, 15% were currently diagnosed with PTSD at the time of the most recent study in the late 1980s. Okay, that was the latest study in the 1980s. Now, it's estimated that about 30% of Vietnam veterans have had PTSD in their lifetime. Again, it was not really known or understood, but has become more understood and acknowledged through the VA system. Aside from direct impacts, however, for more on veterans, civilians are also impacted, especially through media exposure.
Yeah. Been a lot of that over the weekend.
Absolutely. And here we get to the crux of, some of the main issues that might be affecting you and me today. There's a lot of exposure with the war that's going on right now. And studies show, not just one, but there's multiple studies that actually show that exposure may be particularly likely to trigger PTSD symptoms in youths or adults with high physiological reactivity to stress, or with a prior exposure to violence. So somebody who has already had an exposure to violence or has PTSD, and they're watching this media stuff, it may actually trigger them to become, bring back more flashbacks, more memories. Exposure to distressful media images, emotional responses, and disaster-related perceptions at baseline were found to be predictive of probable PTSD several months after indirect exposure to the event. Okay, so you're like, okay, that's great. What does that mean for me? I'm sitting here watching the news. I'm flooded with images.
Sure.
The current war between Russia and Ukraine is heavily covered by the media and is being viewed by many people in the United States. Aside from being directly involved in the war, citizens of other countries who are viewing the gruesome coverage through media will possibly exhibit some PTSD symptoms as well. So, that's kind of freaky when you think about it. It's like, now you're going to say I have a mental illness just because I watch television?
Right.
Not necessarily, okay? It depends on the severity.
Yeah.
But one of the things that changed when we came into the DSM-5 was that PTSD was not only experienced, but either triggering event, media exposure, that there was more ways for people to develop that because we were seeing it. So now they've said, yes, this is true. This is what can happen.
Yeah.
So when you're sitting there and you're watching, I know you said earlier, some of the things that you were seeing, on the television this weekend, and you sit there and you see some of these gruesome details, we love the media and we love what they do, but sometimes they flood us with images that can really overcome our senses, and you almost put yourself there in the middle
Not
of
aware
it,
of it.
and you don't realize it until later.
No.
And this is part of what happens for veterans, especially anytime there is another war of any kind.
Sure.
It just can bring a flood of flashbacks to them.
Yeah.
So if you know a veteran or you have a loved one, that suffers from PTSD, especially that's combat related, check on them right now. Because, if they've turned on that TV, if they're on social media, if they are, anything, they're getting flooded right now with everything that's happening in Ukraine,
Sure.
which can definitely bring up all sorts of things for them in their own mind. And it's a true trigger. It can cause all sorts of spiraling events, can lead to depressive thoughts, suicidal thoughts, all sorts of things. So be sure and check on your friends and family members that do either you've known have suffered from PTSD, or just even that have served, in a war, in a combat situation. As they're watching this, just make sure it's not affecting them on a deeper level. And if you see that, if you see any of these symptoms that, are exasperated or things are getting worse for them, don't hesitate to encourage them to get help. The VAs, we're here at Hope Counseling of Texas. There's all sorts of known strategies to help people through this. In the immediate, of course, trying to de-escalate the situation. So what do you do as a civilian right now? Limit your exposure, guys. Don't sit there for 8 hours or 10 hours or 14 hours watching CNN or Fox News or whatever news channel you watch.
This is not a football game.
Yes, please, just limit your exposure. This, and I talked about this way back when we started COVID about, it was just flooded and flooded and flooded, which led to anxiety. Turn it on maybe an hour a day, 30 minutes a day. Get the basics, get the headlines, understand maybe what's going on if that's what you want to do. But don't sit there and watch it all day long, because you are setting yourself up for things that are going to flood your mind, and you really don't know what level it's going to impact you until you start having traumatic
Right.
events that can happen from that, or nightmares, or just disturbing thoughts.
Right.
So, and really be careful about the kids too. This is another thing. You may be sitting there with your kids and youth that, they all know. Trust me. I mean, even my kids, my 5-year-old was like, "So what's going on? So explain to me Ukraine and what." I'm like, my 5-year-old's asking questions, so they know what's happening and they see it, and but shelter them from those images. That's one thing we were blessed back in the Vietnam era, and that we
Somewhat,
didn't have as
the
much
immediate
media exposure.
Sure.
I mean, it wasn't like every day these lifelike, the images. I mean, we had immediate exposure, but it wasn't the same. It was through radio.
I can remember
It was through
getting an older brother, and I was probably about 5 at the time, and they were showing some Vietnam footage.
Yep.
And I'm like, why would they go over there and do that? And my
Right.
brother, of course, he saw it. Oh, this,
Right.
they're going to come get you
Mhm.
and make you go over there.
Mhm.
And that's what he's telling me as a 5-year-old. And I'm like, oh,
Right.
I don't want to go.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's,
Yeah, it's huge, and it's just, I mean, just be aware, of what the kids, I mean, and things now versus even 20 years ago during the Gulf War. I mean, all the, it's just more vivid, and it's more out there.
They've never seen it like
No.
your guys. I mean, none
Yeah.
of your 3 were
Mhm.
old enough to know any of this. This is their first real exposure to
Right. To
people
major
killing
war.
each other.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, it's huge. Take time to explain to them, but again, just protect them. They don't need to see the news. They don't need to see the images. They don't need to see the violence, all of that that's going on. So just be aware that can actually trigger things. If you see things happening in your kids as a result of this, anger outbursts, startle response, nightmares, all these things, please don't hesitate to get help for them. Again, we're here for you at Hope Counseling with offices in Comanche, Hamilton, Dublin, and Eastland. Anything we can do to help through this. If you're not a local and you need some assistance finding a resource, please don't hesitate to call or reach out to us on Facebook at Hope Counseling of Texas, 325-356-1105. Again, this is a heightened time, and don't forget to just check on your friends that are veterans, combat veterans especially, or just anybody that has had PTSD especially. Just reach out and touch someone, but check on them all, guys, and just know that they're so that they know somebody's there. And get them help if you see some of these changes. So again, we're at 325-356-1105 at Hope Counseling in Comanche, Hamilton, Dublin, and Eastland.
All right, Cynthia Newton, thanks so much for
Thank
stopping
you.
by as
We'll
always.
see you next week.
Yes, ma'am.